Gonna count us down. Welcome to Wild Questions. I'm Sabbath Kapahu, and this is the moment we take each week to have the conversations we know are important, but we don't always talk about. This is about the stories that matter behind the questions we ask. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, and CEO of Wild Leaders, Dr. Rob McKenna. Dr. McKenna, how are you today?
Sabbath, am good, and I just like your intro. I do. So, no, I'm doing really well today.
I love this space, and I'm so thankful for the invitation to ask questions that matter and tell stories behind the questions we ask. So it's so good to be here. I know that you've been having conversations this week with leaders regarding the question that I want to ask and that we're asking ourselves, and that is, does top down leader development work? And that is my question to you today. Does top down leader development work? Tell me about the conversations that you have had recently and why this matters.
Good golly, Sabbath. Yeah, this is a conversation I have been having not just this week, but it's something when people let you in, whether it's a CEO or a senior leader who is invested, they know that they've got to develop leader capacity. Um, this question they ask is that, especially at a time when there is at least a perception of this, a distrust in organizations and sometimes in leaders. How do you develop leader capacity when that may be occurring? And does it work to push leader development down through an organization? And so it's come up because we have so many leaders. This is what they know, that they have to do this, but there's a couple of challenges that come up right away. This is the real story. Like we talk about this, like wild questions that what you and I talk about are things that we don't always talk about. Like what's going on underneath the hood of these kinds of conversations. And one of the challenges is simply this, is like people don't like to be should have. You know what I mean? They don't like to be told what to do in general.
Yeah.
um, and so that's one of the challenges, especially at a time when there is an increasing distrust of organizations. Now, at the same time, that's that feeling that people have. It's the reality of what we're doing. So we have, typically the organization has resources to develop people, and so that's where it's going to come from. But yet there's this tension where people don't like to be told they have to develop. And one of the things that we deal with across organizations we serve is, an organization will use our process, for example, for a year, and they'll be invested in their leaders and so on. And then they'll get a little bit scared of requiring it.
Mm, yeah.
And so one of the things I haven't mentioned that's a part of this question is also the concept of branding these kinds of efforts. So I always tell the leaders we work with, like, one of the branding works. Like Wild Leaders, I think it's a great brand. We stand for whole and intentional leader development. And it's not just the acronym means something, wild, but it's also because wild means something, because every leader has a wild developmental story. And one of the tensions that we face is that we don't want a person to feel like, oh, this is a wild thing. You know what I mean? Like this is just that it's a flash in the pan,
Yes.
because whole and intentional leader development is what I would prefer that they grab onto, in what it is we do, because we're not in this for just a year.
Yeah.
Like our investment is that we know that developing leader capacity takes time. It takes a long time. And so if it becomes a flash in the pan, or it's just a brand, it's seen like a fad, and we
Yeah.
jump onto fads. And so that's another thing that in terms of this top down thing is, like, we like to brand things because people get excited about those kinds of things, but they don't always stand the test of time, because then we get bored and we move on to the next thing. And whole leader development doesn't stop.
Yeah. So, what I hear you saying is, in regards to this first question, we're going to ask three within our one big overarching question, which was, does top down leader development work? The first question is, what is the challenge of developing leaders from the top down? And what I hear you saying is, there's not an ownership to the personal development that's happening if it's not if it's just coming from someone above you or a brand of the organization, because once you leave that organization or something, some shift or change is happening, then it's not about the personal development that is your whole story.
Yeah, it's my what this is an old experience. I had an example where we were working with just a massive Fortune 50 company, and they wanted to do whole leader development. And so we ended up spending a year and a half building a killer process and system and architecture for them. And then it was funny because when I talked about the whole thing about brands, they changed VPs of talent. So that just a new person in the job. And what happens over and over again is then suddenly everything that you were doing is now bad because this new leader has a new ideology, as opposed to we're just in it for whole leader development. We're going to develop ourselves. And so the challenge is that we live in a reality where that resourcing is likely going to come from our organization. And at the same time, some people don't want to be told to develop, or it be like, oh, I'm forced to develop. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I think then it depends. There's another big depends in this statement, that it depends on what kind of process you're putting in people's hands. Is it based on an ideology that's only true to that organization, or is it based on what we already know to be true across decades of research on what it means to develop and invite a person into their own developmental story?
Mm.
So,
Okay,
but
so that's,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's perfect. The second question that we wanted to ask is, what are the realities I must embrace and live into if I'm going to develop leaders who report up through me in my organization? So this is for the leaders that are leading leaders in their organizations, or the leader that is leading everybody in their organization. What is the reality that I must embrace and live into if I'm going to develop leaders who report up through me in my organization? I heard you start to talk about this, but tell me more.
So the first thing is that those tensions are they're just what it is. I don't think you can get around that. And then when we try to when we dismiss away one side or the other, we kind of miss out on what's really going on. We're going to continue to have this tension between, wanting our people to develop and them not wanting to be told to develop. And
Yeah.
then one of the key things, that's a part of our philosophy that you know so well, is that we simply have not invited people well in the past. Like, we tend to tell people, here are the 5 principles of leadership, or here's what you should do. And when people get developmentally lazy, that's what they want. They want that, but then they look onto the new 5 things. And so I think just if we invited people better, and one of the most fundamental ways to invite development, to increase what we call developmental efficacy, is through better questions.
Yeah.
Like, is asking people questions that we don't, as the senior leaders, don't already know the answers to. Because if Sabbath, so you're on my team, is like inviting you into we know that there are common questions. There's common lanes that Sabbath needs to develop as a part of the Wild Leaders team.
Yeah.
But the way that those lanes themselves will work themselves out is going to be nuanced to your story. And so I just think in many cases, what I've tried to work on is developing my capacity to just let the questions be,
Mm,
let the person live into them. We talk about this as like providing a scaffolding that can breathe. And what I mean by that is, like, we do need scaffolding. We need certain lanes, understanding competence, understanding calling and purpose, understanding how to build strategic support, understanding how to build purposeful goals, how to, all those things are affecting the block and tackle pieces of our lives. But the breathing part is, how does that work itself out in the life of Sabbath? And so I think to this question is, living into that tension is one of the necessary parts of actually making it work over multiple years of a person's life. And we're just
and then
not used
the
to that. You're
invitation.
used to, like,
Yeah.
here's the latest program that we branded and we called it this. And it's like, it's got this engaging, kind of catalytic brand, but then it dies a year later because we read another book that seemed more popular.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the invitation into the
Yeah.
leader development,
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah.
and letting the person you're asking the question to actually answer. Not, I've heard you say this over and over again, not asking a question already having your own answer in mind, but letting them live into that. Okay,
Yeah.
last question. As a leader in an organization, how do I develop my people without making them feel that I'm forcing development on them? Remember, we're for the people that are watching, not you, remember. We're talking about, does top-down leader development work? And we're asking ourselves and the leaders who are leading organizations, how do I develop my people without making them feel that I'm forcing development on them?
I kind of put this way ahead of the question, so I'm gonna reiterate something, but give a different example. Um, First of all, I got to admit sometimes I get a little impatient with senior leaders who are afraid to require development, and I
Mm,
know I get where it comes from, but it's like it's because we haven't really required development. We required people to live into the answers we're providing, and
yeah.
so I when I say requiring development, it's like our dream for all the organizations that we work with is that they create cultures of stretch and support where the expectation as soon as you join the team is that you're going to learn and develop, and if someone doesn't want that, they have no business working in your organization. They're not ready yet for that. And so in our best cases and the best organizations we work with is where development is sort of a requirement and developing together.
Mm,
And so the how do you avoid making them feel that is one thing is people have rarely experienced true whole leader development. And that's an investment, like you just said, in the questions that we haven't answered yet. And so at the beginning, it's not surprising that people don't even trust that.
yeah.
If a leader begins to ask questions that the leader doesn't know answers to of their people to make that investment, we don't trust things that we haven't seen before. So it's like the first time we see it, we're like, is this real? Is Rob really interested in my answers to this question? And is it okay? And so I think one of the things is standing strong, and I'm going to continue to ask questions that I don't know the answer to. And my example is a few years ago, Dr. Halleck and I got up in front of we were with a CEO who was going to get up in front of an all hands, and he had a couple thousand people, and he said, "I'm excited about this. We're going to launch, the Wild Leaders process, a whole and intentional leader development process." And he said, "And I'm going to get up there before I introduce you. I'm going to say everyone in this room should be developing the leaders around them." Now hear that. Everyone in this room should be developing the leaders around them. And I had him pause, and I was like, before we go out there, can I change your statement? Will you do this instead? Will you get up there and will you say, what would change if every person in this room were developing the leaders around them?
Mm,
And it's so subtle, but do you see the difference? Like it's an invitation. Because now, if there's 2,000 people in the room, there are 2,000 nuanced answers to that where they're like, does he or she, do they really mean that?
yeah.
They're interested in my answer to that question as opposed to everyone should do this.
Yeah.
So that's my I think one of the things is holding strong to the questions. And answers matter, but they're not the only thing that matters, especially when it comes to developing leader capacity.
Yeah. That's so good. Holding strong to the questions, um, which is what we do day in and day out, as a team and with other organizations and teams, and even on Fridays at our Wild Conversation. So uh, we want to, speaking of invitations, invite you to join us on Fridays to the Wild Conversation. It's a space with leaders from all around the world, from all across contexts, who are committed to their leader development journey, and meeting together and asking questions that we don't have the answers to. I'm going to put the link in the chat, and we would love to have you guys join us there.
Mhm.
Um, and I want to finish our time out with a wild questions. we're serious about this questions thing. We have this thing called a wild deck, and it is literally this thick, and each card has a different developmental question on it. So I'm going to pull one from our deck today. Dr. McKenna, thank you so much for asking questions of me as a team member and of us as we seek to develop ourselves day by day. It is a day by day process. Okay,
Yeah.
here's the question I pulled. Just kidding. That's not a question. That's like the Joker card. Okay. What are 3 things you could accomplish today that would allow you to say, this was a good day? What are 3 things that you could accomplish today that would allow you to say, this was a good day? We will see you guys at our next Wild Questions or this Friday at the Wild Conversation. And there's some fun, more live events coming up on LinkedIn to look out for. Thank you, Dr. McKenna.
Yeah. Thanks, Sabbath.
Next time.